Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for WallStreetWindow.com. Mike Swanson knows his stuff. He made a killing running his own hedge fund and always gets out of the stock market before the government-generated bubbles pop, which is, by the way, what he's doing right now, selling all his stocks and betting on gold and commodities. Sign up at WallStreetWindow.com and get real-time updates from Mike on all his market moves. It's hard to know how to protect your savings and earn a good return in an economy like this. Mike Swanson can help. Follow along on paper and see for yourself. WallStreetWindow.com. All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton. This is my show, The Scott Horton Show. I'm at scotthorton.org and a bunch of other places. Follow me on Twitter at Scott Horton Show. And our next guest is the great Patrick Cockburn from The Independent in England. That's independent.co.uk. And he's the author of Muqtada. Oh, I should say he writes also, you can find his articles at unz.com, U-N-Z, unz.com, as well as at counterpunch.org. His late brother Alex's website, counterpunch.org. Okay, welcome back to the show. Patrick, how are you doing? Oh, I hit the wrong button. Try now. Hi.
Great, thank you.
Oh, very good to have you here. Sorry, I'm not used to getting my buttons right. I never do. Very happy to have you here. Very grateful for your time this evening. I know it's late there. Libya in crisis. Rival militias position themselves for civil war as country disintegrates is the headline at independent.co.uk. There's been a coup d'etat by a general named Khalifa Hifter, who I guess has been living in Virginia, or had been living in Virginia for the last 25-something years, and was parachuted in around the time of the war back 3 years ago, which you covered on the ground there at the time. And now he has overthrown the parliament, and, well, I don't know. You tell us the rest. What's going on?
Well, he's trying to do that. This attempted coup by Hifter caught everybody by surprise. Nobody thought he had the strength to do it, but suddenly he seems to have aircraft that are operating on his side in Benghazi, helicopters, and the suspicion is that he could only have done this if he's acting in cooperation with one or more foreign powers, notably the US, perhaps Egypt, or Saudi Arabia. Probably a combination of all three. He hasn't taken over yet, but a lot of people have generals have moved to his side, militias, fragments of Gaddafi's old army. So Libya is polarizing between heavily armed rival factions. Before this, everything was fragmented. It was so fragmented that you might have sort of skirmishes, small battles here and there. You didn't have a general confrontation, but things seem to be heading towards a general confrontation now.
Mm. In other words, all the different militias, they were there, but they were all so weak that none of them had the ability to get in any really major battles. But now, all of a sudden, this guy Hifter seems to have the backing. The backing. When you say foreign backing, does this seem like an American job to you? I mean, they announced that they were moving the more Marines to Sicily, just in case, only, a day or two before the coup, so it sort of seemed like a pretty obvious thing, no?
Yeah, it seems to follow. I mean, Hifter's background is that he took part with Gaddafi in overthrowing the monarchy in the 1960s. Then he was army commander. Then there were Libya. Gaddafi intervened in Chad. This guy was the military commander, and a pretty disastrous one. He got captured, and the whole venture was defeated. And then he seems to have linked up with the CIA. This seems pretty well established. To have run an anti-Gaddafi military organization, didn't get anywhere. And then he retreated to Alexandria and other suburbs of Washington, D.C. and in Northern Virginia.
So, well, I don't know. I guess that means he's got a pretty unlimited budget, and we'll have more and more weapons. Does that mean that Obama at least is no longer backing the Islamists in Libya? He's now trying to correct the mistake of empowering all of these Benghazi coups, all these veterans of the Iraq war that he's empowered the last 3 years?
Well, one suspects that, they're trying to do something like that. Whether it comes off is another question. But it doesn't really make sense that this guy comes from nowhere and seems to have quite significant military strength. But even on his side, he's trying to line up a coalition, which is of some of the militias, particularly from Zintan, which is west in the mountains, west of Tripoli, some of the militias in Benghazi, fragments of Gaddafi's old armed forces. The commander of the Air Force appears to have joined him, but although that's also been denied. But air bases in Tobruk and places like that have joined him. So this isn't a walkover, and it isn't even a victory yet. But it's sort of shifting towards a confrontation and a sort of bloody fighting we really haven't sort of seen since the fall of Gaddafi.
Yeah, well, and we saw some really bad problems after the fall of Gaddafi. Not that the American media covered it or anything. The narrative has been that this is a great example of the benevolence of American military hegemony and their ability to act fast to save innocents. And even with the Benghazi scandal right in the middle of the whole war narrative, it actually just media-wise sort of stands apart from everything else that's happened in the war. Whose side they took against who and why and any of the rest of the consequences. The only thing that ever happened wrong there that the Republicans have ever heard of was one day of lousy security on September 11, 2012.
Yeah, it's very bizarre. I mean, at the time, I was in Benghazi and later in Tripoli, and there was loads of American media. And then after the death of Gaddafi, nothing. As things sort of went sour and Libya stopped exporting oil and you had this general anarchy in the country, it is as if it was, taking place on the other side of the moon. It really didn't get reported much. And yeah, you're right. Benghazi was sort of the one episode that the Republicans focused on, and which is sort of extracted from everything else happening in Libya and the Middle East to produce this sort of strange fantasy picture of what was happening in Benghazi at the time.
Yeah, now, can you update us? There's been so little coverage about, since maybe, early 2012 or so, there's been very little coverage of the anti-black pogroms that took place, and I guess especially in Sirte. And, I spoke with David Enders, and he had just left the refugee camp where these women were being raped nightly by marauding bands of militia goons, basically. And apparently things got really bad there. But as you well know, you're about 50% of all the Western reporting that's come out of Libya firsthand since this whole war happened, Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, you could see this happening at the beginning, that Gaddafi was seen by the opposition as being on the side of black Libyans and also of black immigrants coming from Mali, coming from Chad, coming from all over West Africa. Much of the work before 2011, before the Gaddafi fell, much of the work in Libya was done not by Libyans, but by poor people from who'd often trekked across the Sahara, to great danger to themselves, to get jobs in Libya. They made up much of the workforce, and much of the workforce that did the most difficult jobs. You also have indigenous black Libyans, and after the time of the fall of Gaddafi, one of their main towns south of Misrata was completely gutted, destroyed. I mean, it looks like something out of the Battle of Stalingrad. These people disappeared, were sent to camps where they're completely vulnerable. They're arrested, they're tortured, the women are raped. This is an appalling situation, and not a secret. I mean, you can just look up, Human Rights Watch and other human rights organizations. this is, something which is very well supported by witnesses, but nothing has been done about it. So, it's a pretty toxic situation all round at the moment.
Yeah, sure seems like. I mean, I never heard any happy ending to that. I don't know if, I guess, a lot of it died down, or just the victims were all dead, so there's nobody left to kill, or what really happened, I mean...
Yeah, a lot of them are still there, a lot of them are still in jail, a lot of them are in these dreadful camps, So it's an ongoing situation.
Yeah. All right, now, there's a reporter named Eli Lake, and he's got kind of a reputation, but he's also got some pretty good sources, too, and he was reporting a thing the other day about how this former American training base, I think near Tripoli, which would have been, over in the western part, not in Benghazi where Ansar al-Sharia has more sway or anything like that, but I believe he was reporting near Tripoli, has basically become an al-Qaeda training base. The Americans, basically all their loot had gotten robbed one night, and they decided that it was no longer a secure base, and so they split and quit training the new Libyan army there. And now it's an al-Qaeda training base. And I wonder, well, and the term al-Qaeda can be pretty slippery, but then again, some of these guys really are, formerly loyal to Zarqawi, maybe now currently loyal to Zawahiri, and at least claim to be the local branch. What do you make of all of that?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of, that's pretty typical. I think that one of the mistakes that's been made is made by the media, it's made by the government, that is to only see as threatening al-Qaeda type organizations that are somehow under the control of what's called core al-Qaeda somewhere in northern Pakistan, northwest Pakistan. But actually, these are al-Qaeda is really an ideology and a way of operating. So these people are exactly the same as al-Qaeda. And sure, they've been filling the power vacuum there. And if it comes to a war, groups of militias and groups of fighters who are wholly fanatical and prepared to die really begin to count. You don't need that number of them, but if you have a few thousand of them on the battlefield, they're a very potent force.
Yeah, a few suicide bombings can get a lot of work done, as they proved in Iraq.
Yeah, I mean, and also, of course, you'll have people coming back from Iraq and back from Syria who have a lot of military experience, much more than anybody in Libya. So they can also draw on a sort of capital of very experienced fighters.
Right. All right, now we got to take this break real quick. We'll be right back, everybody, with Patrick Cockburn from the Independent, independent.co.uk, about the Libyan civil war.
So you're a libertarian, and you don't believe the propaganda about government awesomeness you were subjected to in 4th grade. You want real history and economics. Well, learn in your car from professors you can trust with Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom. And if you join through the Liberty Classroom link at scotthorton.org, we'll make a donation to support the Scott Horton Show. Liberty Classroom, the history and economics they didn't teach you.
All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton. This is my show, Scott Horton Show. And I'm a lucky dog. I got Patrick Cockburn on the line here. He's the best Western reporter in the Mideast that we got. And he writes for the Independent. That's independent.co.uk, for uns.com, for counterpunch.org. And read the book Muqtada al-Sadr, the Shia Revival and the Future of Iraq, if you want to know about the aftermath of that thing, and the future, too. Very important book, Muqtada. All right, so we're talking about the Libyan civil war here, and, well, it sure looks like or could shape up to be one. It's a fight for power. As Patrick was saying, nobody seems to really have the armament to turn it into a real civil war at this point, but it sure does look like a CIA-backed coup by this guy Hifter, trying to seize power in Tripoli and at the expense of the Islamists, who are now fighting back. And it's an open question as to, whether anybody has the upper hand here or will at any time soon. And then I guess, the question for me, Patrick, here would be whether it's even reasonable to assume that something named Libya will survive this at all. I mean, Gaddafi apparently had, just enough power to hold the thing together, but it sure does look like you're going to end up with Benghazi-stan and however they used to pronounce it back when it was 3 different countries, and then there's a whole other southern sort of pseudo-state there. What do you think? Does it seem like they're going to have anything like modern Libya when we're done with this?
It seems to be sort of splitting up. Maybe it won't happen formally. In Benghazi, you've got federalists who consider that Benghazi and Cyrenaica, that's the eastern part of Libya, didn't get a fair deal under Gaddafi, that they were discriminated against, so they want more money from the central budget, and a lot of the oil fields are down there in the east, a lot of the pipelines, and a lot of the oil ports too that the Federalists recently closed. So they were just reopening when this happened, and now Libya is exporting very little oil again. So this is true, and you have sort of, opposition militias which may be based in one area, or they may have a particular ideology. But there are hundreds of these different groups, and the bizarre thing about the main militias, both those not just for the parliament, but those who've recently mutinied, is that they're all paid from the central budget. That it's a good job being a militiaman, and so it's a complex situation. But you're quite right in thinking it's difficult to see a single winner emerging from this, and it's easy to see increasing violence of a sort and a degree that we haven't seen since 2011.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've heard it said too that Libyans, I believe, saying, as well as Tunisians, that, hey, we're not Saudis, and we don't want to be like the Saudis. And, I don't know exactly who exactly speaking and who they're speaking for, but it does sort of seem like it's a much smaller percentage of the people fighting in Libya, and maybe this is just because of the lack of coverage to really examine, but it seems to me as though maybe the ideological component here may be a bit less than, say, for example, in Iraq, and that really it's much more just tribal differences. Like you're saying, the vast number of different
nobody
groups.
Quite knows. And also, when wars start, then the way things work changes. I mean, that might be true of the majority of the population now. But once a war starts, the people who are really prepared to fight to the last bullet may not be very large in numbers, but they are really important to the outcome of that war. Yeah. At the moment, lots of Libyans are pretty disillusioned about what's happened in the last 3 years. They want some sort of order restored. And they see Hifter as representing a return to some sort of order. I don't think it'll work out that way, but there is a big constituency that just want things to settle down. They want the militias off the streets. They want a normal life. That's true of Libya, but it's also probably was true of Syria, but it didn't do them much good.
Right. Well, and so you mentioned the oil there. Is it right that most of the oil is in the east, and so therefore out of the control of Tripoli a lot of the time?
Yeah, that's true. And the big sort of oil port terminals are sort of in the east central part of the country. And the government lost control of them some time ago. The oil fields generally are in the east, or sort of in the center of the country. So, it's like in some ways Iraq, that, there are enormous forces for splitting up Iraq, but there are a few things that keep it together, such as all different parts of the country want to have access to the oil revenues. Mm-hmm. So that may deter people in the West from splitting from the East, or allowing the East to split from them.
If they have leaders that are willing to deal and make compromises about such things, right?
Yeah, but I mean, first of all, one of the obvious and disastrous aspects of the whole sort of Arab Spring movement, the uprising against authoritarian regimes, is that the people leading it, or the people involved in it, had no experience of politics. They were really bad at making deals with each other. They didn't realize if they split or that the old regime was likely to come back, that they were opening the doors to counter-revolution. And, we've seen that in spades in Egypt. And to a degree, we're seeing the same thing in Libya.
Right. Yeah, they're going to end up with a military dictator because they weren't willing to compromise before. Yeah, it's a sad story what's happened in Egypt there, which, I don't know, I guess we don't really have time to go too far into that. Let me ask you about the future of Libya, because I think when we talked back, when you were covering the Libya war from Libya in 2011, or when you just gotten back from there or something, we talked about how in the future, it's going to be so chaotic that there's going to be a lot of pressure for the old Pottery Barn rule and the you broke it, you own it, and we can't just let this vast space become Jihadistan over there. We're going to have to train them up, and then when they stand up, we'll stand down and all that, maybe hold some purple-fingered elections and this kind of thing. And, of course, Obama is much more reluctant to go full scale the way George W. Bush did with an invasion and occupation, but it does sort of seem like, with the assumptions of empire about the responsibility of America to always continue making more problems in the name of cleaning up the last mess they made, it seems sort of unavoidable, and that maybe that's the path they're heading on now. But I wonder what you think of that.
Yeah, I think there's truth in that. But there's also, a standing example of what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. And you could see last year in Syria when, first of all, the British government was going to support a military attack in August, September last year, that they just couldn't get it through Parliament. And similarly with Obama. I mean, to fight a war, you do need some degree of popular support. If there's general popular disillusionment, this can rapidly turn into a political disaster. So I think that the enthusiasm all around foreign powers to get directly involved is pretty low. But this doesn't, of course, apply to covert operations or funding coups or supplying organization and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the game, that's the model they really want to follow as much as they can, right, is just arming up local proxies to do as much of the tyranny as they can get away with there.
Yeah, that seems to be certainly what we've seen elsewhere. And it may work. On the other hand, it may not. It's difficult to see how there can be a peaceful resolution of this in Libya when everybody is armed to the teeth, when they're polarizing. And we haven't seen, as I said, any really big battles since 2011. But that might happen quite soon. Or again, it's a fruit of the fragmentation of everything, that things might sort of settle down for a bit, and you have this sort of division with some units supporting Parliament and some militias supporting Parliament, others against, but they don't actually confront each other for a bit. I think that's less likely.
Yeah. Well, for all the consequences as they've spread on down to Mali and to Nigeria and elsewhere around and around still in Libya, I guess we can, if there's one thing we can count on, it'll be more negative consequences to come from here.
I think so, yeah. I mean, you can, that you have this enormous country. The Europeans are worried because their oil supplies are threatened. And also, you've got this enormous coastline, hundreds of miles long, and over 1,000 miles long. Mm. And of course, there are immigrants from all over Africa getting on board boats heading for Europe. Often these boats sink. There are dreadful casualties. But that can only get worse as the state collapses in Libya, and there's nobody to prevent these people taking off.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to sound like one of the right-wing paranoids and excuse mongers for intervention or anything like that, but it seems like we have the same problem in Syria now, too, where, I don't know exactly who controls what neighborhoods everywhere in Syria, but there seems to at least be a very real potential of a bunch of Zawahiri lovers having direct access to the Mediterranean Sea. And then that could mean access to Europe, right?
Yeah, no, they've already got that. I mean, you can see their videos of them, bathing in the Mediterranean in northwest Syria. So that's sort of already happened.
Yeah, I mean, never mind, right-wing xenophobia, not wanting African immigrants to come just for, whatever economic or racial reasons or whatever. But what about the very real security risk of some of these mujahideen that the Americans have been empowering over, and their European allies have been empowering over all this time? Could be a real problem.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I mean, you take northern Iraq and western Iraq and northern and eastern Syria. There's a vast area there, about the size of Great Britain, which is controlled by Al-Qaeda type jihadis. Much of the Euphrates Valley. This is something that's never happened before. And, this is a very serious threat. These are hundreds of people, thousands of people, very fanatical. And a friend of mine was talking to some of them in southeast Turkey and from different groups. And she told me that the one thing that when the subject of 9/11 came up, that all these people thought it was a very good idea and wanted the same thing to happen in Europe. So this is a mounting threat, with nothing much being done about it or even it being recognized.
Yeah, and nothing hindsight 2020 about this either. I mean, of all people, Patrick Cockburn, you're the one who's been saying so all along, that this is the results of what our policy has wrought in Iraq and throughout the Middle East. So, the historians won't be able to say they weren't warned because they're just saying so. And with that, I'm sorry we got to cut it off and go to our next guest. We're way over time, but thank you so much for your time again on the show, Patrick. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great talking to you as always. That's the great Patrick Cockburn, everybody. Independent.co.uk. Libya in Crisis. And please buy and read his book, Muqtada. Oh, John Kerry's Mideast peace talks have gone nowhere. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for the Council for the National Interest at councilforthenationalinterest.org. U.S. military and financial support for Israel's permanent occupations of the West Bank and Gaza Strip is immoral, and it threatens national security by helping generate terrorist attacks against our country. And face it, it's bad for Israel, too. Without our unlimited support, they would have much more incentive to reach a lasting peace with their neighbors. It's past time for us to make our government stop making matters worse. Help support CNI at councilforthenationalinterest.org. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for cashintocoins.com. So you want to buy some Bitcoins? Cashintocoins.com makes it fast, easy, and safe to get Bitcoins. Just deposit the money into their account at any of the major banks they support, and then just email them a picture of the receipt and your Bitcoin address, and you get your Bitcoins. Almost always the same day it clears. In a tough, competitive new market, cashintocoins.com has the advantage. A great system and great customer service to keep you coming back. That's cashintocoins.com. Just click the link in the right margin at scotthorton.org. Phone records, financial and location data, Prism, Tempora, Xkeyscore, Boundless Informant. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for offnow.org. Now, here's the deal. Due to the Snowden revelations, we have a great opportunity for a short period of time to get some real rollback of the national surveillance state. Now, they're already trying to tire us by introducing fake reforms in the Congress. And the courts, they betrayed their sworn oaths to the Constitution and Bill of Rights again and again, and can in no way be trusted to stop the abuses for us. We've got to do it ourselves. How? We nullify it at the state level. It's still not easy, but the Off Now project of the 10th Amendment Center has gotten off to a great start. I mean it. There's real reason to be optimistic here. They've gotten their model legislation introduced all over the place, in state after state. I've lost count, more than a dozen. You're always wondering, yeah, but what can we do? Here's something important, something that can work if we do the work. Get started cutting off the NSA support in your state. Go to offnow.org. Hey, all, Scott Horton here. Don't you want a bust of Murray Rothbard for your desk at work? A Ludwig von Mises for your bookshelf at home? A Harry Brown or Ron Paul as a gift for a friend? Check out these awesome busts of your libertarian heroes at myheroesthink.com. They come in 6 or 9-inch sizes and now in color, too. Of course, gold, silver, or bronze. I've got the Harry Brown one on the bookshelf in my office, and I love it. Just click the banner ad in the right margin at scotthorton.org and enter promo code ScottHortonShow to save $5. That's myheroesthink.com.